All right, Noor, thanks so much for being on the Friends with Wheels podcast. My first question that I have for you is tell the audience a little bit about you and how you got started with CARES.
Thanks so much, Laszlo. It's so nice to be here and really appreciate you for taking the time. So actually CARES, I think it really originated for me with how I entered the field of supporting autistic and neurodiverse folks and universal design. And that's through my cousin. So my cousin sadly passed away in the last few years, but he was diagnosed with profound to severe needs. And my family, so my dad's side of the family comes from a country or in which, and especially at that time, you sort of followed what authority figures said. So when my cousin was born with profound disabilities, he was born to an area that was under resourced, in a place that it was a little bit more difficult to ask questions. And so my family brought him to the United States to have to look for supports and services. And they were persuaded to enter my cousin into an experimental procedure at a highly reputable hospital. And I think that they really, English was not their primary language. And I think that they were really in a position where they didn't feel like they could ask questions or even understand a lot of the information that was being shared. So sadly, very sadly, I think my family was taken advantage of. And my cousin was entered into this procedure and then ended up having fewer skills than he had had before the procedure started. And so that, that really stuck with me growing up and made me think so deeply about the importance of affirming practices, cultural responsiveness, advocating, and being there in support of our community. Yeah, so that's what kind of brought me here. And then CARES is, that CARES is really from that idea. I'm I have ADHD. I identify as neurodiverse, and working with the community that I'm fortunate to work with, there was a lot of conversation about like what are the supports and resources that we need, especially in higher education. And what we heard kind of overwhelmingly is that it's a barrier for students to have to disclose that they have a diagnosis or register with an offices to get supports and services. So CARES, which is the Center for Autism Advocacy, Research, Education, and Supports, really focuses on embedding universal design. So what are ways that we can support everybody, including those who might identify with ADHD or other neurodiversities, or who might identify, as autistic, to be successful in the environment without having to disclose, without having to register, and without having to pay for anything. So that's really kind of a bit of my journey and a little bit about CARES.
Hmm. And sorry to hear about your loss.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Um, my next question is, how do you given your experience and what you've gone through, how do you sort of do help others, who are in that same situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. What we try to do, what we try to do at CARES, and certainly my goal is to continuously like strive to do this personally, is to empower the folks that we have the honor to work with and support, to give as much knowledge to them as possible, so that could make decisions that are better informed. Like I think about my family, and if they really understood what the possibilities were about entering my cousin into this procedure, they may have made a different choice. And I don't think that they had that opportunity. I don't think that choice was given to them. At the same time, however, I think that there's a lot of burden that can be placed on the individual, can be placed on their loved ones. And so we also need to, I think, educate the community on, universal supports, on neurodiversity, and help the community be as inclusive as possible, so that somebody again doesn't have to say, I have ADHD or I'm autistic and I need help, rather that the environment is as supportive for them as possible. So it's really sort of like a multiple pronged approach, which is trying to empower individuals and their families who are again neurodiverse, autistic, to know like rights, resources, what they, really to like give them all the information that we can, um, to educate those in the community, and so that they can be more supportive, so that someone doesn't have to disclose again, and then also to, advocate for what's really needed right now. So for example, in the kind of the state of the country, there's a lot of discussion about cutting funds at a state level, at different state levels, that can be used for therapies and resources. So something that CARES is working on is helping to advocate against some of those cuts. So it's really, listening to the community, empowering the community, but also giving that information to those around us to say, here's how you can help, and here's how we can create an environment that will be beneficial for everybody.
hmm And my next question is, what are some of the gaps that are missing in terms of like fi getting the resources available to autistic individuals and their families? I know you mentioned the cuts, but is there anything that's more? There's more to that, or
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So I think there will be different kind of ideas behind this, and I think it'd be. I will not say that I will give everything, because I know there's so many aspects and components that are part of this, and that certainly might go beyond what we do. But all of that being said, is I think that there are a few different areas. One is that one is in our research and in our general kind of funding opportunities. So we want to think about like the studies that are being funded through grants and federal grants, state grants, et cetera, and really ask ourselves, are those research studies, which subsequently drive things like recommended therapies, drive things like what medication, all those pieces, are they being done with the community that we are hoping to serve with the research? Are they are they community formed? Are they participatory based? Meaning, are the participants themselves like able to make their voices heard in that research process? And if the answer is no, I think it's really important for us to kind of step back and say, are we actually meeting the needs of the community if we are doing something without the community? And at CARES, we tend to think that is not helpful. So are, the things that we are considering to be evidence-based, the things that we are considering to be, the most appropriate therapies, are they developed in collaboration with the communities that we're working with? And if the answer is no, then I think we need to kind of step back and look at what we are doing. And then I think also to like an emphasis generally on asking the individual to change, to conform to societal expectations, has been historically the way that we have looked at supports and services and resources. And I think that that's a major gap. I think we need to look at, again, for the risk of being redundant, we need to look at the way that the environment should change and really kind of focus some of our efforts there. So I think those are two really big pieces. And then another, and again, there's quite a few. Another thing that I would say, and this is kind of a little bit of my soapbox and my plea, is I would bring all the voices together at the table. So, there are different individuals of different backgrounds and identities, and sometimes we're working in silos. But if we can work together to come up with resources that are needed, I think we'd be in a much stronger place as a community. So I feel like that, is a bit of a potential gap and something that we'd love to see grow over time.
hmm And now that I asked about the gaps that are missing, what are the solutions to solving, issues around this particular topic?
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And that's a really great segue. Again, so many different ideas and thoughts, but one of the top ones that comes to my mind is doing this together, collaborative, community informed, participatory research. So again, having all voices at the table, having all voices involved in the conceptualization of the research that we do, the resources that we create, and if they're not taking the time to evaluate. So it's really kind of listening and working with the communities rather than doing things for them. And I know that's not going to solve everything, but I truly feel that if we start there, we're going to be in a much better place. So across all aspects, I say, let's work together, let's listen, let's learn, and let's let that listening and learning inform the priorities and initiatives. And that's really something that we try to do always that cares, is listen, learn, collaborate, so that the initiatives that we are targeting are the ones that our students and our communities who are neurodiverse have said, this is what we need to work on.
hmm and I understand that CARES is a part of Empire State University. I'm guessing that's in New York City.
Yeah, yes, yes. So it's part of SUNY Empire State University, which is one of the public schools in New York State, which is really nice because it helps us to be more accessible and affordable. And what's also super cool and what attracted me to it is that SUNY Empire has really sought historically to support historically underrepresented or non-traditional learners. So a lot of our students are, sort of adults, so older than kind of that 18 to 22-year-old demographic coming back for second and third degrees or coming back to finish their degree at in their 60s. It's amazing. So that's something that is really actually it's a beautiful part of Empire State University.
The reason why I ask is because how can other, states, have this sorts of model, have the sorts of cares like model? Because I'm in Washington State and it's vastly different than New York City, but do you have any ideas?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I think it's working together. And again, forgive the repetition, but we would be honored to, and we're not the only ones doing this work, but we would be honored to consult with anybody and to do that free of cost. So something like with the CARES model is that we feel very strongly about is that it's not proprietary. It's not, you don't have to pay to access, the like really kind of the ideas and the models that we're engaging in. It's something that we're happy to just share because we would love for everybody to think about universal design and how to embed that across the institution. And again, we're not the first, we're not the only, but we would love for folks to just really look at what exists and if they can tap into folks who are doing the works that we can share. So that is something that not to be too presumptuous, but we would be honored to hear from anybody and be glad to just collaborate and give our thoughts and ideas just so that folks have them.
And what have you learned in doing this kind of work with cares?
Listening, learning um, is is the most important piece. There have absolutely been many times where I have thought that I knew the best answer or that I thought this is the way we should move forward, and I was wrong. And I think that continues to be a wonderful and valuable experience, right? There's always an opportunity to be humble, and there are always things that I don't know. So, really, if we move forward collaboratively, I think we're going to be in a much better place. And I think that when we do that, we sort of listen, learn, collaborate. We choose, sort of one conversation at a time, one initiative at a time, but we work to really make that community informed. I think it also helps it be sustainable, right? Keeping in mind, like, how can this so continue over time, and that will help it grow and have that ripple effect. So I would say that that is the top thing that I have learned so far.
hmm And is there anything that you guys are doing at cares that's coming up or that that is important that people should know about?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. We've got a couple of things that we're super excited about. One, I want to shout out our amazing Dr. Lauren Lestrom Allen, who's the Assistant Director of CARES. She has pioneered an initiative to help support libraries, so public, accessible spaces to be increasingly supportive, embed universal design, and really, hopefully create a place for belonging for those who are neurodiverse of all different identities and backgrounds. I also want to shout out Dr. Ali O'Mara, who is our training coordinator. They have been working really hard on initiatives to create like sensory friendly spaces and to create, even more places of belonging, such as our peer-to-peer program that we have at Empire State University. And I think just generally what we're also really excited about is we're working with Empire State University is part of the SUNY systems. So there's 64 public schools in the state of New York, and we're working with kind of the parent SUNY to create modules that all the universities can take that will talk about universal design and supporting neurodiverse students. So we can hopefully start to help other institutions, higher education institutions, be supportive. So really excited about that.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the resources that people, with autism or parents that have children with autism should consider? Because I think the first one that comes to mind is, Autism Speaks is a good one, and like Minds of All Kinds, which this I had the CEO of that organization on, Margot Joffe. She talks a lot about her experience with ADHD and kind of how she helps ADHD people in the workplace and other environment settings. But what other resources can you think of? that are important
Oh,
for people to consider and know?
love that, Laszlo. Thank you so much. So it varies. I would say, thinking about higher education as one category, as there are really great resources like the College Autism Network that collect information and data on higher education institutions in the United States that have autistic supportive programs. So I think that is a really, really lovely space. Um, the ASAN, which you might have heard of, or you might have heard about that before, but the Autistic Self Advocacy Network, I think that's a great place for folks who, are thinking about advocacy and thinking about, sort of what are those next steps. I would recommend that as well. So those are two highly varied supports, and there are quite a few, but I think that's a really good place to start.
And lastly, how can people be sort of aware about, autism and just like terms like that in general? Because a lot of them don't know what autism is or how it's diagnosed. Because I have a family member who has a child who has autism like, characteristics, and the whole thing's kind of new to him. So for those, like him in that situation, what would they what tips advice would you give to them?
That's a really good question. For the families, I think you mentioned Autism Speaks. They've got some really strong resources there. I think sort of doing a search, right, for reputable sources of information can be incredibly helpful. So looking for some of those like well-established organizations that talk about evidence and strategies, advocacy, that's really important. So I think, giving our families the knowledge of how to assess some of this information, how to evaluate, like the accuracy of it is really, really important. I think those finding those support groups can also be really helpful because they can give you ideas that you didn't think about before, and also a safe space to be able to connect. And then, finally, maybe this might go a little bit beyond your question, Laszlo, but a lot of that burden is placed on the individual, is placed on the family. I think we as the community need to educate our doctors, our therapists, our, everybody in the community, first responders on autism, neurodiversity, universal design, so that we again can be better, give them knowledge that they can help others be more successful and create those environments that are more beneficial for as many people as possible. So sharing that responsibility.
Mm-hmm. All righty. Okay.